Going on, everybody? Welcome to episode 60 of Bet Parks Presents Stick to Hockey Live. Anthony DiMarco from the fourth period is going to join us momentarily. I was just thinking about this today, thinking about the Bet Parks app, and I'm going, I can't wait for Tone's Takes to come back on to give us some NHL plays on the Bet Parks app. Ooh, it's not that far away. I'm ready to go. Let's get it started. Get the Bet Parks app because the game's not back on the ice yet at the pro level doesn't mean there's not something to wager on. You've got preseason football if you want to really be, get into it, or just maybe some light wagers just to have a little fun watching the preseason games. Live game, in-game betting, same game parlays, odds boosts, player performances, first to score, exact score, you name it, quarters, whatever you want to gamble on, you can get your action in on the Bet Parks app. Plus, we're only a week away from the college football season. So there's a ton to get ready for, not the least of which you mentioned is, obviously you have the golf, the BMW this weekend in Wilmington, Delaware, or you've got Formula One, or you've got tennis, but you also have the remainder of the baseball season and headed into the postseason. So there's tons to wager on the Bet Parks app. So do yourself a favor and take it from me. The Bet Parks app is everything you want in a mobile casino and sportsbook. Easy to use, easy to navigate, easy deposits, easy, get your cash back easy as well. Easy withdrawals, you name it. It's all there on the Bet Parks app. So sign up today, and it's faster to win than ever before. And if you sign up, this is actually for new and existing users. Use the promo code JASON750, JASON750, and that'll get you a risk-free bet up to $750. Again, new and existing users, terms and conditions do apply. So download the Bet Parks app today. You're not going to regret it. You do need to be present in Pennsylvania or New Jersey. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. Some may say there's not much to talk about right now in the world of the NHL and in Flyers land. I say bullshit. We bring him in right now from thefourthperiod.com. TFP. It is Anthony DiMarco. What's going on, Ant?
Doing well, buddy. How about you?
I'm doing good. And I say bullshit. There's a lot to talk about.
Oh, yeah.
Some interesting angles of conversation as World Juniors winds down. Rookie camps around the corner. Players will be reporting in the next week or so for captain skates. It's about ready. This is like the final calm before the storm.
Yeah, not to mention from more of a league-wide perspective, we got a pretty big free agent signing yesterday and a subsequent trade, aka a cap dump, kind of giving people an idea of what it would take to move a significant contract at this stage in of the offseason, or all offseason for that matter, is Sean Monahan. Once a legit top-line center, only 27 years old, has to be packaged with the first-round pick to dump him, and obviously Calgary Flames use that cap space to hand a $49 million contract to Nazem Kadri. So, I mean, one thing about this summer, and maybe it's because of some bizarre dates, obviously the draft was in July, free agency was in mid-July, but it feels like all summer we've gotten like big news trickled around here and there to keep us talking on some level.
Yeah, I was surprised. Like, obviously everybody thought Kadri was going to the Islanders, and Lou had a deal in place and was just going to do what Lou does and not announce it and had to clear some space. But ultimately, I guess he wasn't able to clear space. And Tree jumps in, Brad Tree living. What an offseason for Calgary. It's such a bizarre situation because they lose Gaudreau after a 115-point season. Tkachuk is gone. He's in Florida. They get Huberdeau. They get Weegar. They get now Nazem Kadri. They replaced what they lost, and they may be a better team, not long-term, but right now, than they were the one that finished the season.
Oh, my girlfriend just made a cameo, but yeah, but I agree. Honestly, like at this stage, obviously this is like incredibly premature, but I would say like Tree Living's an early candidate for GM of the year. Like the fact that he was able to basically get kicked in the pills, losing his two best forwards, and come out with a roster to what you said is arguably better in the immediate future is insane. And they discussed this yesterday on TSN 1050 radio. Their host Brian Hayes said this almost verbatim, that instead of tripping over their lip and saying, oh, woe is me, poor us, no one wants to play in Calgary, they just absolutely refused to acknowledge that and accept that. And look, is Nazem Kadri going to be worth $7 million all the way until he's 39 when he's locked up? No. Is Jonathan Huberdeau going to be worth $10.5 million in 4 or 5 years from now when he's in his mid-30s? No. But the thing is that this is a team in a win-now window. You have a top 5 goaltender in the NHL. You have a top 3 defensive center in the NHL in Elias Lindholm. You have arguably the best and deepest defense in the entire NHL. You have a rising up-and-coming player like a guy like Andre Mangiapane. And this wasn't a time to really just play the woe is me card and like just get, basically they had a free pass to take a year or two back. Like if you're Brad Treliving and you go to your owner, fans would have understood it. And if you're transparent, you go to your ownership. I believe their primary owner up there is Murray Edwards. And you say, look, nothing we could do. He didn't want to sign. He forced his way out, all this. But instead of doing that, what Brad Treliving did is, look, he made some, risky moves. He obviously hands out some contracts that are surely not going to age well. But as one person would say, specifically Brian Hayes said, is that you are now proving to other players that Calgary is a franchise that is committed to winning. And for a defenseman like Mackenzie Weegar, who is obviously a pending UFA, you just see your former teammate and current teammate Huberdeau get locked in. You see them bring in a guy like Nazem Kadri. It goes a long way to show players that you're committed to winning, and will go a long way in convincing players into signing with you long term.
Yeah, and it's amazing, and because here's, one of the narratives around the NHL, and it's been pretty true, is that players don't want to sign long-term to play in Columbus because it's a smallish city. It's a college town with Ohio State right there. And players don't want to play north of the border for a couple of reasons: Canadian media, tax situation, American dollar versus the Canadian dollar, all those reasons. We haven't seen a cup winner north of the border since 93 when the Canadians won it with Patrick Waugh. But this offseason, you have arguably the biggest name free agent, Johnny Gaudreau, ending up in Columbus long-term. You have what took place in Calgary, guys leaving. But like you said, Huberdeau, they had that dinner in Montreal, Treliving and Huberdeau. Then they got a deal done that must have been the most effective steak dinner ever. and I hope that, I'm sure Tree picked up the tab for that. And now you sign Kadri as well. So a lot of the old narratives about where players want to play, I'm not saying they're fully shifted, but this is a big shift this offseason.
Well, look, you hear about, teams that, kind of get the benefit because of their geographical location. You hear about, let's say, the Florida Panthers or Vegas now. Obviously, New York has always been that team. And, when a lot of people said, well, the Flyers didn't have Artemi Panarin and Jacob Trouba choose them willingly. And that's all well and true. But I do think that while some teams get a geographical advantage right off the hop, there is a way that you can operate your management team and your franchise that will entice players to sign with you regardless. And, you look at a team like the Ottawa Senators, okay? And, we were talking a bit off the air. Obviously, Claude Giroux's from there. Obviously, family is a big priority for him at this stage in his career. But, I think the way that Ottawa operated this offseason is something that will go a long way in attracting big name free agents. And look, like I just said earlier, you are always going to be behind the 8 ball if you're in a Canadian market, more specifically out west in Winnipeg or the Alberta teams. You're going to be behind the 8 ball if, let's say, you're an American team like Columbus or a smaller market team. But if you show a commitment to winning, and you show a commitment into wanting a player like Treliving did, flying here to Montreal in the middle of the summer, whining and dining Jonathan Huberdeau, overpaying for him, but still I think a contract that's worthwhile, especially given the players that they lost. There are ways to overcome a geographical disadvantage. And, like was discussed yesterday on TSN Radio, it was so easy for Brad Treliving to play the woe is me card. He had basically carte blanche this offseason and be like, well, what do you want me to do? 2 of my best players walked away. And he said, screw that. And he brought in, he did the best you possibly could given this situation. And look, in 3-4 years, and then some. And look, if you ask me, from a long-term perspective, are they better off than they were? Obviously not. Kachuk is 24. You probably have 2 contracts in Kadri and Huberdeau that aren't going to age perfectly.
Yeah.
But as early as next season, Jay, I was thinking about it yesterday. You could make a strong case that they're a cup favorite going into next offseason.
Yeah.
Or next season, rather.
Certainly in their division, right? I mean, are they the better team in their province?
I would say so. I'm going to say that as long as Edmonton doesn't sort out that goaltending. Obviously, you signed Jack Campbell, but you could always speak to this better than me in the goaltending position. But Jack Campbell, I think he is an upgrade, obviously, over Mike Smith and Mikko Koskinen, although you would be an upgrade over Mike Smith and Mikko Koskinen. But I would say so because you look at the defense, they don't have that stud number 1 guy, but you have a lot of very good number 2s and 3s with Hannafin and Tanev and Shillington and Anderson. Mackenzie Weegar is now going to be playing somewhere in there. You can make the case he's their best defenseman right away. You have a really deep center depth position now with Elias Lindholm, who I think is the most underrated center in the NHL. You plop Kadri in there. Now you move Michael Backlund down to the 3rd line center spot. I think a lot of this will come down to how a guy like Andre Mangiapane kind of excels in a top line role. You would assume that he's going to be pushed up there to compensate for the departures of Tkachuk and Gaudreau. But in my opinion, I would give the slight edge to Calgary at this point. But as we saw in the playoffs, when you have McDavid and Draisaitl, it's very easy to go the other way.
Yeah, and they may be a wagon in the regular season, but what teams, more positioned to perform in the playoffs? That's ultimately what it comes down to. Harmon Dale put out this tweet yesterday: Kadri 31, Markstrom 32, Huberdeau 30, Backlund 33, Tanev 32, Coleman 30, Toffoli 30. He said Calgary's recovered extremely well, but with the 30-plus talent they have and no under 24 core pieces, Calgary's got 2 to 3 year window before they run into some real trouble, and he's absolutely right. But Tree Living, like you said, he's an early candidate for GM of the year. If it works out on the ice, I think he's going to nail it. Conversely, they had the Athletic. I think Dom Lucizen did the Athletic GM rankings according to fans and the public. And while Calgary's performed very well this offseason, Chuck Fletcher and the Flyers front office did not. Ranked 32nd in the NHL. Do you put any stock in this?
I mean, it's a public and fan poll, right? And as soon as I saw that Dom was writing that, I said, okay, here we go. Flyers related. And look, we know the vitriol that has been shot at the Flyers way from the fans. Frank Saravelli talked about on his podcast a few weeks ago about how he has not seen this much vitriol towards the Flyers front office probably ever. And Frank's been around the Flyers beat for how long now? Almost 20 years?
Yeah.
And I mean, people have completely turned on Chuck Fletcher. I'm not going to blame them. Obviously, I don't think he is as doom and gloom as maybe some people have made it out to be. But from a fan and public perspective, I don't think it's surprising at all that people absolutely hate this guy. And it's gotten to the point now where when any move is made in the NHL, everyone has to just kick rocks at Chuck Fletcher.
Yeah.
Like Monahan gets traded with the first round pick attached to him. People start saying, oh, well, that's what it takes to win and move money, commitment to winning. You sign on some Kadri. Oh, well, that's what you have to do. Who cares how it'll look at the end? Because basically what Calgary did was exactly what Chuck Fletcher would have had to do had he wanted to sign Johnny Gaudreau, right? Maybe on a smaller scale. Yeah, it's exactly the same concept. Right down to the final transaction yesterday of moving a big contract to bring in a big name free agent. And look, I think that Calgary is much closer to winning than the Philadelphia Flyers are. But from that fan perspective or that poll from the public, I mean, I wasn't surprised at all that they came in 32nd. How about you?
No, I wasn't surprised either. A lot of times, you look at it and these polls and the reaction and the way you answer them is based on this exact moment. It's based on the here and now. It's not based on projections going forward or anything like that. And that's just the way it is. That's how you live as sports fans. You live in the moment a lot of times. And it's easy to say tear it down and rebuild, and that's how they look at the future. But in the moment, they're pissed, and rightfully so. and the way it's gone and what was communicated and what took place are two different things. So I get why, fans are hurt. They're
Yeah.
wounded by what's taken place and where they are right now. And, this season is going to be so paramount to what the next 5 seasons are going to look like. Chuck is a guy that a couple of years ago, nobody would have said a bad word about him. When he hires AV and he goes out and makes the Gudis deal with Niskanen, and he goes out and he makes the deal to get Pitlick with Ryan Hartman, and he brings in Kevin Hayes, and it all works even without Nolan Patrick around that entire season. Mm-hmm. But things change quickly in hockey. And, there's been some bad decisions, and there's been some circumstance and things in his control and things out of his control. And the fact of the matter is they are where they are. They've earned where they are. And that's it. End of story, right? I think they're a team that, like you said, we don't see some of the things that are coming. And I think that Brent Flair and Chuck Fletcher do a good job when it comes to drafting. I know you talked to some people about it. Like, look, Emil Andre in World Juniors has been just a revelation. He's not ready for the NHL. Like, immediately people see a player having success and wherever they are to go, is he going to make the team this year? No, he's not ready for that. But he's developing very nicely.
Yeah, I spoke to someone with the Flyers who's attending the World Junior Hockey Championship and asked specifically about Emil Andre, and he will play for HV71 in the Elite League, and then they're going to sign him, I would assume, following the season's end, and bring him over next season. The one thing also I was told is that Sweden has, a good track record of developing D, so the Flyers are very, comfortable with keeping him.
Track record.
Very good track record, so
Yes.
The Flyers are very comfortable keeping him over there. But, this is a guy that has controlled games with the puck since his draft year, and now he's really showcasing it as one of the older players in this tournament. And I believe we talked about it last week that this is a tournament that typically is for guys a year or two post their drafting. Obviously, exception, Connor Bedard, case in point, but this is a tournament where guys who are 19, 20 years old, 2 years post being drafted typically are given a platform to shine. And look at Emil Andre. He has been the absolute horse for that Sweden team. Very skilled, competitive, controls games with the puck. And this is a guy that I think that down the line is going to prove to be a good draft selection. And I think that, look, it's easy to get caught up in this, and you have to be very careful because, we talked about this in the mid 2010s under Ron Hextall, when he was, dubbed the drafting guru. And in the end, he was just an average drafter, not exceptional, not terrible, just heavily average. But I think that even going back to Minnesota, you could see that Chuck Fletcher and Brent Flair, more specifically Brent Flair, has a really good eye for talent. And I think that you're seeing a lot of guys that the Flyers have drafted since that regime got here in 2019 that you're saying, not only could these guys be NHL players, but they have a chance to be some impact players. And obviously,
not a superstar, but an impact player.
Yeah. And look, impact player, that's extremely subjective, right? What that could be. But I mean, the Flyers, I don't think have been in a position to draft a superstar type player. Maybe that's Cutter Gauthier, but that's so far down the line. But I mean, you see a couple of guys here just at this tournament, and I look at Denwyer, who I was told is now going to probably be a center for the long haul. I know drafted as a left wing, but he prefers playing center. So I kind of see him as maybe a 3C as a complete ceiling down the line. You see Tyson Forster having a pretty good tournament, which is kind of impressive, all things considered, being buried behind guys like McTavish and Bedard on that high-octane Canadian team. And then you look at Emil Andre and look, do the Flyers need another skilled left shot defenseman? Probably not. Yeah. But it is kind of an embarrassment of riches. And I think that if there's one thing to maybe be positive about, it's that the Flyers drafting under this regime looks fairly above average.
Yeah. And, Andre's a guy, to me, he's very 2022 NHL type player. Not that he's ready for the NHL, but I mean, this era of professional hockey, he's built to play the way that the game is played right now. Creative, can skate, possesses the puck extremely well. And obviously, has an eye for the net and has been able to find the back of it. So I think he's going to be an interesting dynamic guy to keep an eye on. I'm going to have to check in with Joachim Grunberg and get the latest because Yoki's over there. He's the Flyers director of international scouting and is in Sweden. So I'll have to get some download from Joachim on him as well. I know he's really been keeping a close eye on him, obviously, because of the geographic part of it. But he's an important player that is developing. And I do like the fact that he's over there developing in that Swedish mold of defensemen. I mean, look at the guys that they have produced, that country on blue lines across the league. I mean, they know what they're doing when it comes to developing D.
And like, look, even a guy and look, this is like a much less significant level, but even a guy like Adam Ginning, who was drafted actually under Ron Hextall, I believe it was 2018, where like almost as soon as that draft pick was made, like it was dubbed the bad pick. Like everyone hated that pick. And now he's coming over to Lehigh next season. And, he will need time down there based on my understanding. But I asked specifically, like, is he a guy that can maybe become like a Robert Hagg in the future? And I was told, that's a very fair comparison. But he's a bigger guy, will need to play more of that, physical role. Hagg, I don't think he was overly physical. He could throw
when he hit, he was heavy. He was a heavy hitter, but he didn't hit a ton. But I mean, he came out of juniors as an offensive defenseman.
Yeah, he had to change his game a lot.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that would benefit Ginning, that, he's always kind of been that bigger body as opposed to Hagg. Like, I remember when they drafted Hagg, what was it, 2013, I think he was drafted?
Yeah, around there.
Like, I think he was in the Morin year, if I'm not mistaken. And I remember, like, people telling me, like, oh, yeah, like, he could run a power play, he jumps up in the rush, and then he came over to North America. And he had to completely change his game in order to become an everyday NHLer. As opposed to Ginning, I think he's always kind of been that stay-at-home, big, rugged, and tough guy. If he could learn to play the right side, that'd be fantastic. It would be nice if some guys could play the right. Although I guess Ronnie Attard kind of checks that box. But yeah, I just think that the Flyers have, and look, this is a Ron Hextall pick, so credit to him. But I think the Flyers, especially on defense, like it seems like they kind of have like a never-ending wave of guys who theoretically seem to be have NHL at least caliber ceilings, not to say superstars, but can play everyday minutes. Like even a guy like Igor Zamula. Like I think if Igor Zamula put on 15, 20 pounds of muscle mass, he would be in the NHL this year.
Yeah, and he had that sickness that sucked 20 pounds right off him last year. And that didn't help. Now he's got to almost start from scratch about putting weight and muscle back on.
Because even last year in his short stint with the Flyers, like I think he played fairly well. Like I think his underlying numbers were well. The only defenseman that I saw last year who came up and just looked like complete ass, and I don't want to be mean, but was Hogberg. Hogberg was a guy that
scored a goal.
Yeah, he scored a goal, but he was not a guy that looked good.
He's an AHL player.
Yeah, which is fine. You need those guys. But you look at guys like Attard and Ginning and Zamula who are in the AHL, and then you look at Andre, who is going to go back over to Sweden. I know that they've been high on a guy like Brian Zanetti, who plays for Peterborough, I think, in the Ontario League.
Yeah, in the Petes. Yep.
Yeah, they have some good, and he's a guy that also battled injuries this year. But like, look, he's they're in good hands, I think. Obviously, you would want a guy like Provorov to step up as that true number one guy. But I mean, it certainly gives you options, especially with a guy like Travis Sanheim entering a contract here.
Big time. That's exactly where I was going to go with it, because we're still in this pseudo flat cap world. If you can fill that role, maybe not to the same degree, but to a close degree for that second pairing left side guy that can provide you offensive bursts, get into create some offense, jump up in the rush, then and that you're not paying. That you're paying on an ELC, it allows you to spend in other places. And if Sanheim has a really good season, he's going to get paid, And if you're out of it and you're not trending toward a playoff team, and a lot of, I'm not even talking about playoffs yet because I think it's way too, I can't even come near that prediction right now. But when you look at it and go, okay, you might be able to get a number one for him at the deadline and have another, bite at the apple in the 2023 draft. In the first round. Me, especially if he would extend with the team you traded him to.
Well, like Sanheim's a guy that, I've kind of asked about if there's been any contract talks with him. Haven't really gotten a straight answer. the Flyers sometimes come out of left field with extensions, kind of like with Couturier last year. I think it was around this time that they announced his contract extension.
Yeah.
But like maybe it could save you a couple $100,000, maybe $500,000. But I find like if you were to extend Sanheim right now, like it would really tie your hands in a lot of ways. Because I feel like you'd almost be tipping your cap that he's the guy you're going with over Ivan Provorov, as opposed to if you leave Sanheim unsigned and a pending UFA. And like you said, I think if you get to the deadline and he's a pending UFA and he's having a season similar to last year, people are going to have a lot of intrigue on a guy like Travis Sanheim. And look, I look at Sanheim, like he's played very well over the last 18 months or so. Last year was obviously an incredible year for him. You can make the case he was the team MVP, I think, in a lot of ways.
Agreed.
But like he's a guy that I think that, and you've said this numerous times, like they've unlocked him as a solid 5-on-5 number 3-ish type of guy. I think on a cup team, he's like the anchor on your second pair. And, I look at a guy like Sanheim, like 6.5 million is kind of what he screams to me. Like anything more than
6.5.
Yeah, something like that. Or maybe you go max term 8 years at 6 to bring the overall value down, or the AAV rather. That's where I see him. I don't think he's a top pair guy. That's just me.
7x7 on the free agent market, though. If he, pending who goes to market, and if he has another good year, he could be a 7x7 guy.
Is he a guy that you would be comfortable with playing on your top pair?
No, it's not a top pair for me. I don't see him in that role. I think he's right in there as a super good second pairing left side guy that you can get him some matchups that aren't quite as taxing defensively, because I think if you put him on a top pair, then you're taking something away from his ability to join the rush and get up the ice, because it's more defending than it would be in some of the matchups that he'll get. But to me, I go into this year, I don't sign him. I go into this year and I see, I gain some knowledge under Tortorella on Provorov and Sanheim. And if I am out of it, one thing that I've been critical of Chuck on too is, signing guys when they're expiring, when your season is in tatters. Now, I was for signing Lawton in that situation because I thought the cost for replacement would have been far more than what they paid him. And we didn't know at that time that the following season was going to go in tatters as well. We thought maybe they could rebound and be more like the team from 1920 coming off a shortened bad season. That wasn't the case, obviously. But then Ristolainen, I would have traded him at the deadline because I think you could have got value for Ristolainen for one of those playoff teams. And look, you can always re-sign the guy. If you want to sign, you can go into free agency and re-sign him. It's less likely, obviously, but you still can. So I would go into the season weighing my options. And because of what you said before, too, there's a lot of depth in the system for defensemen and left side defensemen. And one of the guys that's not a left side that you mentioned too is Adard, who showed me flashes of a guy that I think is an NHL player. I mean, you saw some of the ability to defend. You saw a lot of mistakes. I mean, he had a -4 or maybe even a -5 in a game. But he rebounded from it. And we saw some of that offensive ability. Like the goal he scored on Jack Campbell. You remember that goal where he goes short side, bar down? I mean, that was absurd. That shot going down the right side and just wired one. And I remember talking to him after. I said, Ronnie, I didn't see that coming. And I guarantee Jack Campbell, after you scored that, was like, I didn't think he could do that. Like that was a snipe. And it was unbelievable. So we're going to get to the 5 most compelling storylines. We're going to count them down from 5 to 1. But before we get to that, you sent me this tweet. And naturally, I'm going to have an opinion on it. It comes from Mitch Gallo. And he says, crazy that Lundqvist, Luongo, and Price all got to a Stanley Cup final, but couldn't win. And he said, I've said it before, don't build around a goalie. It's the last piece, not the first piece. And so I want to get your thoughts on it first, because I certainly have a lot of thoughts on this. The notion of building around a goalie.
Well, look, Mitch is a guy who works for TSN Radio here in Montreal. Really good guy, often very
Hmm.
opinionated, and I like hearing him. I feel like sometimes he just goes out of his way to ruffle feathers, which is funny. But I think that the root of what he's saying is true. I'm not sure if it's the last piece that you get. I think that may be pushing it a little bit. Like, I don't think that, going out and picking Michael Leighton off the waiver wire is basically the best way to go about it. But I do agree that building your entire philosophy around a goalie is something that's dangerous because of the examples he's given. Like Montreal did with Price, Vancouver did with Luongo, the Rangers did with Lundqvist. And I think there's a difference by saying that like your goal, like building your entire team around a goalie as opposed to your goalie ultimately being your best player. Because we've seen over the last decade how many times the goalie was the main catalyst in a cup victory. Quick in LA, Thomas in 2011 with Boston, Vasilevsky in the back-to-back years, arguably Jordan Binnington. All these guys were, Conn Smythe winners, Binnington not so much, but he certainly got them to where they need to be, especially after Jake Allen was so inconsistent. But one of the common trends with all these guys is that when you look at Boston, they weren't building around Tim Thomas. The guy was 32 years old, 33 years old.
Yeah.
Jonathan Quick came out of nowhere. That was supposed to be Jonathan Bernier's job. Jonathan Quick was a nobody. Bernier was the big time goalie prospect at the time. Jordan Binnington was playing in the AHL with Boston's AHL affiliate. If it wasn't
Providence.
for Providence, if Ville Husso wasn't hurt, he would have got the call up when Jake Allen went down.
Yep.
Vasilevsky, a bit of a different situation. Obviously, the 20th overall pick or whatever in 2012. But again, even him, like I don't think that he was the main piece in that team building philosophy in Tampa. You have Hedman, you have Kucherov, you have Point, you have Stamkos. So while all these guys ended up maybe being their team's best player, it wasn't like the entire franchise was built around these goaltenders.
See, for me, Ant, you can't build around a goalie. It defies logic
And this
because
is coming
he doesn't
from a goalie.
play on a line. He doesn't play with other players per se. It is the alienation of the position. It is the man on an island. The team is in front of him, and he's part of the team and a huge component of it. But this whole notion of building around a goaltender is bullshit. Like what Mitch says, I actually agree with him in part. To me, it's not about building around a goaltender because I don't think any team has ever built around a goaltender. The Penguins drafted Marc-Andre Fleury first overall, but then they also drafted Evgeny Malkin, Chris Letang, and Sidney Crosby. So, can you say, did they build around Marc-Andre Fleury? No, they've built a team. Really, the notion of, I think, what Mitch is getting to, but I don't think he articulated it well, was can you win when you're paying a goaltender huge money? To which I texted Kevin Woodley the tweet after you sent it to me, and we all know Kevin's the goalie guru, the goalie whisperer from In Goal Magazine. He's been on this show many times. He's a good friend, and Kevin said, so I shot it to him, and he said, "Yeah, Tampa says hi." But again, to your point, what you made with Tampa, I mean, originally it was Ben Bishop.
Yep.
And then they had Vasilevsky in the wings, and then when they felt like he was ready, they moved Bishop to Dallas. They keep Vasi, but they also, like you said, they have Stamkos, they have Hedman, they have Point, they have Kucherov, they have Palat, they had, all these guys. They have a team. So this notion of building around a goaltender, and I know some Flyer fans will see that and go, see, that's why you got to trade Carter Hart now. To me, you cannot measure if you're moving forward if you have shit goaltending. You can't measure it because shit goaltending will pull everything down.
Oh, yeah. And look, I think that there's a difference between building around a goaltender and then just having consistency at the goaltending position. Like, I put out a poll yesterday, like, who's the best goaltender of the post-05 lockout era? And obviously, Vasilevsky is a guy that you could make the case for already. But let's say, like, you take him aside and you look at guys more like Lundqvist, Price, Rask, all these guys. If you go from a consistency standpoint, in the 2010s, I think Tuukka Rask is probably the best guy you could find because of from a
Fleury
consistency
would just fall short because he kind of lost the job there in Pittsburgh to Murray. but then he goes to Vegas and is stellar. So
As a rebirth.
yeah, but then kind of loses the gig to Robin Lehner, and then goes, so there's a lot of variables to Fleury in there. But yeah, I mean, Brian Cunningham messages in and goes, the team building around a goaltender is like saying we're building around a punter in football. Just don't, or a kicker. You can't, it's too specialized. So, but the notion of, paying a goalie huge money can, is it worth it? Like, because look at Florida. They brought in Bob, paid him $10 million a year on a 7-year contract, $70 million. Is that too much? Now, their situation, I think, makes less sense because just a couple of weeks before they signed him, they drafted Spencer Knight 14th or 16th overall in the first round. So that was kind of like, well, what are you doing here? Why are you doing that?
Well, they were scarred. They did that because of Luongo's last year where he could barely stay healthy. And who was their other goalie that they had? I forget.
Vokoun?
It was post Vokoun. Was it? No, it was Reimer. It was James Reimer.
James Reimer, yeah.
And it's weird because Reimer's actually proven to be a pretty solid goalie out in San Jose now after his pit stop in Carolina. And look, I think you need consistency.
And Toronto.
And Toronto, yeah. Optimus Rhyme. I actually liked him in Toronto. He was funny.
Did too.
But I said yesterday in response to Mitch's tweet that I think the best example that you could have of a goalie who you paid a reasonable contract and when the chips were down, he gave you borderline elite level goaltending, and certainly in 2012 is Quick. Jonathan Quick to me is the ideal goaltender that you have. I think they paid him 5.75. 5.75. They locked him in a long-term deal. Did he ever win a Vezina? Was he ever a regular season, elite level goaltender? He had his ups and downs.
2012, he was on his other contract. He signed that deal after that, and he's actually on the last year of that 10-year deal this season.
It was 10 years. You see, that's a good contract.
Dude, they got everything from that contract. He still played well last year. And kind of, tamped down a couple of guys along the way that were supposed to grab the crease from him, but he just keeps performing. He's a freak. I mean, I think he's a total freak. He's one of my favorite. You want to go down a YouTube rabbit hole? Type in Jonathan Quick highlights. Holy shit, that stuff he's able to do with his body. I'm amazed he can walk. The thing about Quick, he's a freak athlete and he's a freak competitor.
And he's a guy that's dealt with injuries because of the style he plays. I remember in 2012, one of the things that he would do that I found so interesting was that he would literally get so far down to the ice to look through people's skates to find where the puck was coming from. He was like a cat.
He make himself really small to keep that chin down. He's a guy that's big on head trajectory to track pucks. Reimer's a big guy on that too. And yeah, absolutely. And he will get really wide and really low. Brian Elliott was that way too. Would get real low. And really, I'd almost be like, man, you guys got all this size, and then you just make yourself as small as me. You know what I mean?
And I think Quick is a guy that I don't know if he ever won a Vezina, or if he was ever, let's say, so. Or if was he ever considered better than Lundqvist or better than Price or better than Rask, all these guys. But it seemed like every single time the chips were down and it mattered, Jonathan Quick gave you elite level goaltending. And not to say that he was, a dumpster fire in the regular season. He was always good. But I just think that he's the most ideal type of goaltender you could have. And I think that Carter Hart's ceiling could be a Jonathan Quick. Obviously, he needs to prove it more on a consistent level. But as we talked about last week, if you want to, take into consideration playoff hockey, obviously a small sample size for Hart, he certainly played at a borderline elite level in 2020. So I think it is a good point that you don't have to build your entire operation around a goaltender like Montreal did with Price or the Rangers did with Lundqvist. But if you could have a guy who's maybe your third or fourth best player, like Quick was in LA, I think that's kind of your recipe for success. And in that situation, obviously 10-year contracts don't exist anymore, but that's a situation where you're paying him a fair amount of money. I think Tuukka Rask was the same thing. Rask was making $7 million a year, if I'm
Yeah.
not mistaken.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like, let's say you can get Carter Hart on an 8-year contract because his deal is up in 2 years, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
And he's going to be how old by then? 25, 26?
Yeah, that's crazy.
And I mean, I guess that you're ideally, like, depending on where the cap is, 8 years in between $7 and $8 million, I would assume is where, but you're also, when I say this, you're also assuming that his development kind of stays linear. Like, you think he's going to get better, right?
I do. I think that his numbers aren't indicative of his play because the environment has been so shit.
Yeah.
It just hasn't been good for a litany of reasons. Quick from 2010 through the 2017 and 18 season. This is from 25 years of age to 32, which is goalie prime, right? 437 games played, a record of 232, 151, and 47. His save percentage is .919 and a .221 goals against average and 41 goose eggs. I mean, he's been in the Vezina conversation a few times. He was second in the Vezina after the 2011-12 season. So he had a great regular season before that first cup, too. Okay. Fifth in the Vezina in 13-14, seventh in the following season, third in Vezina in 15-16, and then was ninth in Vezina 2017-18. But he's never won a Vezina. He did win. No, he did not win the Calder. He's been an All-Star 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times, including last year, which is bananas. So I think it's a good point. And, I would rather not pay my goaltender big money so I can pay more money up front and allocate it. But without it, you're going nowhere. And frankly, Montreal would have never got to a cup final if it wasn't for Carey Price. Frankly,
he's the only reason.
Yeah, I mean, the Rangers would not have gotten to that final without Lundqvist. They had a chance because they had that goaltender. So that's the deal. Let's get to the top 5. My biggest, most compelling 5 storylines heading into the season. All right, Ant? We'll start with number 5. And to me, number 5 is the young guys. It's Frost, it's Tippett, it's York, it's Cates. It's those guys and what they're able to do this year in development. Does Frost have that breakout, legit NHL center season? Does Tippett also become a more prolific goal scorer at the NHL level with opportunity and consistency and maybe playing alongside Frost? York, he's going to be on that third pair. Does he take that next step forward? And does that impact the Sanheim situation? And then I love Noah Cates. I had Jackson Cates on the podcast today for Flyers Daily. And I asked Jackson, I said, the way you and your brother play, to me, it's like very responsible. Your dad must have been a coach, and their dad was their coach until they played through Bantam. And you can tell when dad's the coach because you have responsible play in all zones.
Yeah, no, I agree 100% about the young players. And, I talked about it with Dan on Brotherly Pod last week. And, he had said that his biggest, positive for this season would be if all these young guys took a step forward. And you're looking at those types of players. Maybe later on in the season, a Bobby Brink could, come back from injury.
Dan on something.
Hallelujah.
Write that down. That's breaking news. I agree with Dan, the Flyer fan, on something.
And, you have Bobby Brink that maybe could come back from injury and, I carve out a job more consistently. You have a guy like Wade Allison, still unsigned, I'll say, but I can't imagine he has all that much leverage. Tyson Forster, I know that he's going to need some time down in Lehigh coming back from injury, but he's done well. But I think that those are Lazinski always, and is it not shit or get off the pot time for Tanner Lazinski?
Yeah, he just needs to stay healthy.
And that's the unfortunate part. But after a certain point, even if health is working against you, do you not kind of have to just I don't know, you can't blame a guy for getting hurt, but after a certain point, you can't keep giving them the benefit of the doubt, right? Just because they're hurt.
Yeah, because availability means too much. I can't keep using that roster spot and cap situation on a guy that can't stay healthy. So there is a line of demarcation. We saw it with Sam Moran. if he could just stay healthy, but he just never could.
Yeah.
He was carrying too much body that his joints couldn't, his knees couldn't handle it.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, the young guys I think are a huge thing. All right,
And even Sandstrom. Sorry, before you on.
Yeah, Sandstrom. You're right. That's a big element. I didn't even think of that because he's going to be the backup goalie.
Yeah,
to me,
it's not going to be a Grossnick or whatever his name is.
No, Troy. It's not going to be. I think he's going to be the Phantoms goaltender, and call up if a guy gets injured.
Yeah,
I think it's Sandstrom all the way. I don't think there's much of a goalie battle here at all.
No,
they'll call it that for obvious reasons to push guys, but I don't think that will be the case ultimately. Number 4, Tony DeAngelo is one of the most compelling storylines because things went well last year for Tony DeAngelo. Top pair playing with Jacob Slavin in Carolina. That team was a wagon. But if the Flyers are not winning games, do old habits creep in? Because he's a competitor. Like, I think him and Torts will have battles, but ultimately, like two paisans, they'll hug it out at the end because they both want the same thing. They'll bang heads because they both want to win so bad. And I think that's healthy. But, how is that going to work out, that dynamic of DeAngelo if Flyers are not winning games like he did? It's easy to be happy when you're winning games. Winning fixes everything in sports. It's the ultimate deodorant. And then to take it a step further, what's the dynamic of the relationship between Tony DeAngelo and Ivan Provorov, assuming Ellis is not healthy?
Well, that's the big question mark, right? Like, he was brought in to theoretically finally stabilize Ivan Provorov's right side. Yeah. And, from an on-ice perspective, he's a guy that is probably the biggest X factor for the Flyers this season. Because if he comes in and he gels with Provorov and he could play even to, let's say, 90% of the level he played to last year, including what he can do on the power play, it's going to make a huge difference. Like, this is a defense for me that
they will defend less.
They will defend less. I find they have very good puck movers. Like, the only guy who really can't be trusted to get the puck out of the zone is probably Justin Braun, and he's going to be playing as your number 6. So that's not something that scares me at all. And Tony
DeAngelo, playing with the puck mover in New York.
Exactly. And, he's going to have a much more reduced role this year than he has ever since coming to Philadelphia, or now in his return to Philadelphia. And I think that the Flyers defense has a potential to have a really high ceiling here. I know everyone's down on Provorov. I know everyone hates Rasmus Ristolainen, but I'm curious to see how Ristolainen will do with more minutes pushed down. I'm curious to see how Provorov will do with a legit top pairing caliber partner. I said it last week. I won't go down that hole again, but I think that Provorov at his best in 1920 played on a similar par or in a similar tier as Jacob Slavin. Maybe not as good, but in that tier. And I think that Provorov is a guy that historically, like I've said, when he has a partner that he thinks, can help him and is playing on a hockey team that's playing meaningful games, he will always elevate his play. And look, DeAngelo, from an off-ice perspective, obviously there's a lot of things that could go sideways with Torts or if the season goes off the rails. But from an on-ice perspective, I think he's probably the biggest X factor this year.
Yeah, I think it's a huge one. I totally agree with you. Number 3, biggest storyline for me, most compelling storyline heading into the season is the return of Sean Couturier. While Tony DeAngelo is a huge X factor, Sean Couturier in year number 1 of an 8-year deal, coming back from back surgery, I don't have much, worry about him. There's a little. And he's so important to the team. To me, he's their most important player and has been for a number of seasons. And not necessarily their best player over the last couple of seasons, but most important player because of what he does at all zones. The 200 by 85. Sean Couturier's return is a huge storyline for me heading into the season.
Yeah, coming off of back surgery, hasn't played since December of last year. And another thing is this is the first time we're going to see Sean Couturier in a top line role where he doesn't really have Claude Giroux on his wing. And now that's not for me to say that Giroux carried him, but I'm curious to see how his offensive game will play out without Claude Giroux on his left side. Assumingly he's going to start the year on that top with Travis Konechny or Cam Atkinson. The left side really up for grabs with Joel Farabee. Will it be Lawton? Will it be Kate? Will it be JVR? We don't really know. But I mean, if Sean Couturier can't get to even close to where he was in, let's say, 1920 or 2021, this team won't really have that much of a hope in hell, right? And I'm just curious to see. I have no doubt that even with the injury, his defensive game will still be at an elite level. I'm just very curious to see how his offensive game is, especially at 5-on-5. Like I've said it numerous times that I would not force feed him power play minutes. I would assume that he will start on the first power play unit. I'm not sure if I would go there just because you want to save his minutes for 5-on-5 primarily. But I think that his 5-on-5 offense is the biggest question mark for me. And not so much a question mark, just an intriguing thing going into this season.
Yeah, he to me, very important player, and we'll see what he yields this season. Number 2, top 5 most compelling storylines heading into the 22-23 season. How about the Provorov-Sanheim dilemma? We talked about it earlier, and we talked about the depth at the left side. But to me, this is going to be something that's going to be incredibly compelling throughout the season. What does Provorov and Sanheim do under Tortorella? Because ultimately that will determine who's here long-term. One, both, neither. We have no idea. But to me, that's a big, big storyline. And just shoring up the defense and the D-zone structure, those two guys are incredibly important to that because of the trickle-down effect and the effect it'll have on the goaltender as well.
Yeah, no, and this is a big season for both these guys, and I would say that it's damn near impossible that both these guys are on the roster in 23-24 just because of the organizational depth and the salary cap. And Dan and I kind of ran through it last week on Brotherly Pod that if you move on from, let's say, Sanheim, or you move on from Provorov and give Sanheim Provorov's money or close to it, you're going to have about $16-17 million in cap space. And, with guys like York, with guys like Zamula, with guys like Andre, I think they can afford to do that. Yeah. And look, I think that based on the last 18 months, Sanheim's probably in the driver's seat, probably a bit more ahead of the 8 ball. But if you ask me, I think Provorov's ceiling is much higher. I think that at their best, Provorov is the better defenseman. I think that his contract situation is more favorable. I know a lot of people say that Provorov is paid to be an elite level 1 and this and that. He's really not. If you look at it, if you look at his 3 most comparable contracts, pure cap friendly, it's Esa Lindell, it's Josh Morrissey, and it's Matt Dumba. And to me, those are all, if you ask me, like solid number 2s in the NHL. In the case of Matt Dumba, maybe more of a number 3 playing behind Brodin and Spurgeon. But he's paid as a very good number 2 defenseman. And maybe that's what he is. Maybe that's what he is. I think he's more of a low-end 1. But, I mean, now you're kind of splitting hairs. But as opposed to Travis Sanheim, that we said he's more of a second-pair guy. Elite level number 3. I think Provorov's contract situation gives him a bit more of an edge and more of an attraction for the Flyers to keep him, as opposed to Sanheim that's going to be due a new long-term deal and is a year older than Provorov. We can't discount that completely. But either way, I think that one of these two guys won't be here probably come the trade deadline, and maybe by some grace of God, if they're in the playoffs, probably by the draft.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And it's going to be another one of those real big storylines heading into this season. And, with all those guys that they have in the pipeline on the left side, it could make one of those guys expendable, but you got to be careful. You got to get this right.
As of right now,
got to get it right.
As of right now, which way do you lean?
I think that the way I'm leaning, and this is obviously is based on no knowledge of who's going to perform with Torts.
Yeah.
But to me, it's Sanheim's the UFA. Sanheim's the guy on an expiring deal that could get you a number 1 pick in next year's draft. So to me, it's more likely that Sanheim is gone. But I can't discount the fact, Provorov was salty at the end of that season last year. He's got to have self-accountability or else that ain't going to wash with Torts either.
Yeah.
So if that's not there, then Sanheim gets extended and Provorov gets moved. It's just the fact of the matter. The number 1 storyline heading into the 22-23 season, it's real simple. It's 5 letters. It's TORTS. It's Torts. He is the most compelling storyline because Not only is he a huge personality, a coach that's had a lot of success, but in my opinion, he's just what the doctor ordered for an organization that's lost its way, that's lost its DNA and its identity. And he's a guy I think that can bring that back. The task will not be easy. It's not a guarantee that he will. But to me, that's the biggest storyline heading into this season is Torts and the weeding out process. That's the biggest storyline going into the year.
He's pretty much the face of the franchise this year, is he not?
And I think so.
And look, I do think that I'll speak for myself personally that like I kind of have to catch myself from time to time, trying not to like give this guy too much credit. Like we have to remember that he isn't the reincarnation of Jesus Christ himself, and that he's not going to, put on the skates himself and single-handedly drag everyone up to their absolute ceilings. But he's a guy that I think, although most people universally hate the way this offseason went, I think everyone can kind of agree that he's someone that everyone is excited about. And that most people, even outside the Philadelphia market, think will do a good job here, and someone that they think that the Flyers needed. I said it before. I think he's a guy that will finish out his contract in Philadelphia. I don't see him being fired in the immediate future. I think he's a coach that, for the first time in a while, has carte blanche with these players. I don't think it's going to be a situation where, like they pull the rug out from AV, although that was kind of self-induced, or a guy like Hackstall, who everyone turns on at the end, more so the fan base. I think he's a guy that is being brought in to kind of weed out the bad apples here. Yeah. And
create that identity again.
Create the identity. That's what this offseason is about, right? Like changing the way the Flyers are viewed. Although people hate the contract, myself included, like Delorier is a guy that was brought in for that very reason as well. And, you bring in Torts, who is going to come in, stabilize the defensive structure. Obviously, special teams is going to be at the forefront of that. So Bradshaw will be a big part of that as well. I almost said Brad Larson, but he's the coach down in Columbus now. Yeah. So, I mean, the coaching.
And Rocky Thompson, too, on the power play.
Rocky Thompson, obviously, he was a feisty player at the same time. It's going to be very interesting to see what kind of impact the coaches have on these players, because this is a team that it's damaged goods in a lot of ways. But can you salvage any of these? And I think there's a lot of good players here. No elite players, but there's a lot of good players. Carter Hart, Travis Konechny, Ivan Provorov. These are all guys that I think have a lot more to give than we've seen in the last 18 months or so. And the coaches are going to come in here, give them a brand new open sheet. I'm using the wrong analogy, but you know what I'm trying to say. And
page.
Blank slate. There you go. Blank slate. And I think that it's like we've said it. I feel like the theme for this year is going to be shit or get off the pot. And I think Torts is going to kind of be the judgment.
Should that be the hashtag?
I think so. Shit or get off the pot. Like who? Like
now or never. Now it's shit or get off the pot.
Well, what players is that not time for? Hayes, Couturier, and Atkinson. Like I mean, aside from those guys, it's shit or get off the pot for almost every player on this team. And maybe that's an environment where there's not too much. I think it's important that for the first time in a while, the Flyers' main players aren't comfortable. And I think Torts even mentioned that, is that I think it's good to sometimes make it an uncomfortable environment for players.
You got to push yourself, make yourself uncomfortable.
And look, and this is not to throw shade at guys like G or Simmons or Voracek, but I think that those guys were in very comfortable positions since 2014, where they knew, and look, they were good players more times than not. Like Simmons, 30-goal guy. Giroux was amazing, specifically 17-18. Voracek, always good for 65, 70 points, but they knew no matter what, they were always coming back.
And get power play time, and they were, I agree.
It was like, anyone could be the coach, and you knew that Voracek was on one side, Giroux was on the other, and Simmons was in front of the net. You knew that was the power play that Lavi kind of put into place 11 years ago. But I think for the first time in a long time, since early Peter Laviolette days, there's a lot of uncertainty for a lot of main players on this team. And I think that uncomfortable environment, that environment of saying like, shit, like, am I going to be here next year? Is my spot secured, like Sanheim and Provinov on the left side because of the organizational depth, like Travis Konechny on the right wing because of the organizational depth, like Morgan Frost because maybe he sees a guy like Elliot Denwye playing center for the juniors and Cutter Goatsy being drafted. Maybe now these guys are going to be like, okay, like I have to come back. I have to play well this season, or maybe I'm not going to get another second chance.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's torts, and I can't wait for it all to get started. All right, we're going to wrap it up, Ant. Great job, as always, fourthperiod.com. Read Ant's stuff there with tfp.com.
Looking forward to it next week, man.
We'll crank her up once again. Thanks for doing this, and we'll talk next week.
Take it easy, man. Enjoy your weekend.
There he is, Anthony DiMarco from the fourthperiod.com. Great stuff from him, as always. And another fun-filled episode 60 of Bet Parks Presents Stick to Hockey Live. Oh, I can't wait for the season. We're going to announce something coming up in the next couple of weeks, too. We're going to expand our coverage for Stick to Hockey Live. So look forward to announcing that. I'm not going to give you all the details right yet, but we will give them to you eventually. And I got to tell you about Bet Parks because, like I said in the beginning of the episode, I can't wait for Tone Stakes to come back on to give us some hockey plays. It's not that far off, and Bet Parks is the app to get all your action in, not just on hockey. You can get it in on football, preseason football, college football next week will kick off. You've got the remainder of the baseball season and then the playoffs. You can have player performances you can bet on. How about same game parlays, live in-game betting, odds boosts, you name it. It's all there. First to score, exact score, so many things to bet on. And you got to check it out on the Bet Parks app because it's simple to use, easy to navigate, faster to win than ever before. So download the Bet Parks app today and take it from me. You're not going to regret it. You're going to love it. Love it. Easy deposit methods, fast payouts, you name it, all there on the Bet Parks app. And new existing users right now, if you use the promo code JASON750, JASON 750, that'll get you a risk-free bet up to $750. Some of these other places, yeah, they go like risk-free bet up to $50 or $100, even $500. Nobody is going up to $750 on a risk-free bet. So again, the promo code is JASON750. Terms and conditions do apply. Download the BetParks app today. You need to be present in Pennsylvania or New Jersey. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. All right, we'll be back next week for another brand new episode of Bet Parks Presents Stick to Hockey Live. In the meantime, everybody, enjoy your weekend. Enjoy the week. We'll talk to you next week on a brand new episode of Bet Parks Presents Stick to Hockey Live. Have a great week, everybody.